Welcome back. Welcome back to Alone on the Wall by Alex Honnold with David Roberts. Today we're going to be reading Chapter 2, or at least part of it. It's lengthy. Chapter 2 is, listen, not only is it a very private hell, but it is also a 30-page private hell. So we're going to see if we get through this in one session. Worst to worst, I may break Chapter 2 here up into two sessions, which would be fine, I think. But we're going to get going. If you have not listened to Chapter 1 yet, I'm reading this book to you, and you should go back and listen to Chapter 1, because it's a great book, and we're having a great time. So, moving right along. I'm a pretty quick reader, so we'll see how much we can get through. I'll take a time inventory about halfway through this, and we'll see if I need to break this up. But for now, let's get right into Chapter 2, A Very Private Hell. Once I told Chris Widener about Moonlight Buttress, I should have known the word would get out fast. He lives in Boulder, after all, right in the thick of the climbing scene. I didn't anticipate, though, the explosion of postings on the internet about the climb. I went online to check them out. My first reaction was surprise. Oh wow, I'm in print. That's cool. Somebody had even dug up a photo of me climbing. That's my photo, I bragged to myself. There was also, of course, the undercurrent of posters who wondered whether the free solo of Moonlight Buttress was an April Fool's joke. But one thing I've always appreciated about the climbing community, after so many of my climbs by now have gone undocumented, by film or photos or unverified by witnesses, is that people have taken me at my word. In April 2008, no one on the internet was accusing me of perpetrating a hoax. If the free solo of Moonlight Buttress was bogus, it was some poster who was lying about it, goofing on the credulity of the Super Topo audience, maybe. I still could not have imagined ever becoming a sponsored professional climber. If I got a little notoriety, I just hoped that maybe some gear company would give me a free pair of rock shoes. He's right, that's the dream. That's every rock climber's dream, is just get a free pair of shoes. That's why we all do it. That's why we climb. The tendonitis in my left elbow hadn't gotten any better. If anything, all the work I'd done rehearsing the moves on Moonlight Buttress and then free soloing it had probably made the condition worse. I finally realized I had to knock off climbing for a while to let my elbow heal. That's how I ended up spending the summer in the Sierra Nevada, doing long hikes and loops on big mountains like the Evolution Traverse. It involved a lot of scrambling, but as long as I could do it in tennies, I figured it didn't count as real climbing. Meanwhile, I was getting into great shape. Recently, a journalist asked me if I could stop climbing for stretches at a time. Sure, I answered. You mean you could go for, say, a month without climbing? He asked. Hell no, I blurted out. Not a month. I thought you meant 3 days. If you watch Free Solo, you get to experience a little bit of Alex Honnold's idea of quote-unquote resting. Spoilers, he's climbing indoors with a brace on his foot, on a roof, no less. Anyways, that's just the way it is with me. No matter what else I've turned my attention to over the years, nothing seems as interesting as climbing. I can't do without it, even though by now I've been climbing in one way or another for almost 20 years straight. That whole summer in the High Sierra, the idea of free soloing the regular northwest face of Half Dome floated around inside my head. It's such an iconic formation, one of the most striking thrusts of sheer granite anywhere in North America, and I'd always loved the way it dominates the whole east end of the valley. By 2008, Yosemite had become my favorite climbing area in the world. Some climbers are drawn to towers and pinnacles, others to complex ridges. What I love is big, clean faces, and they don't get any better than the ones in Yosemite, especially El Capitan and Half Dome. You stand at the base of El Cap and look up its 2,700-foot precipice, and you just say, wow. Granite is also my favorite kind of rock, and that's what Yosemite is made of. More clean, sweeping walls of granite than anywhere else in North America. The regular northwest face route takes a pure line up the left-hand side of the nearly vertical wall. That summer, as I got in shape making loops and traverses in the High Sierra, Half Dome became my muse, a random source of motivation that drifted through my thoughts while I strolled along one ridge after another. The notion of trying to free solo the route was intimidating, yet irresistible at the same time. In terms of sheer grandness, it would be a big step up for me, an even greater challenge than Moonlight Buttress. The regular northwest face route was pioneered in 1957 by Royal Robbins, the finest American rock climber of his day, and two partners, Jerry Galwas and Mike Sherrick, or Galwas maybe. 2 previous attempts, including one by Robbins, had gotten no higher than a quarter of the way up the 2,000-foot wall. The face, which inclines at an average pitch of 85 degrees, is intimidating in the extreme. As Steve Roper writes in Camp 4, the definitive history of early climbing in Yosemite, the view upward from the base is overpowering. It doesn't seem possible that humans can climb such enormous cliff with normal techniques, i.e. ropes, pitons, and bolts. It took the 1957 trio 5 days to complete the ascent, during which they pulled out all the stops, using their newly invented chromolybdenum pitons. Every time I see that word, I want to say pittons. Is it anyone else, or is it just me? Something funny about the English language, just the phonetic way to pronounce things versus like the way it's spelled. I want to say pittons. Also, the chrome molybdenum. I think I'm saying that right. A better man than me would have looked it up in between this, but anyways. Using their newly invented chrome molybdenum pitons and expanded bolts for direct aid. Lowering Robbins 50 feet so he could pendulum sideways across the blank granite to reach a chimney system. And enduring 4 bivouacs as they hung from slings and stirrups. The key pitch, led by Galwas, involved strenuous aid on pitons and bolts that reached a disturbingly narrow ledge, stretching across the face only 200 feet below the summit. Thank God ledge today is one of the most famous features anywhere on American rock. The Yosemite Decimal System scale from 5.1 to 5.15 measures only pure difficulty, with no regard to danger. Another scale within the YDS, however, is grade ratings, which indicate the overall difficulty, danger, and required commitment of a long route on a big wall or mountain. In short, the seriousness of a major ascent. Until very recently, the system ranged only from grade 1 to grade 6. A few landmark ascents in the last decade, nearly all of them in the remote ranges, have been tentatively rated as grade 7, but by and large, the pinnacle of the scale remains grade 6. The first grade 6 ever climbed in the United States was Robbins, Galwas, and Sherrick's 1957 ascent of the regular northwest face of Half Dome. At the time, it was matched only by a few routes in Europe. In 1976, 19 years after the Robbins team climbed the wall, Colorado-based climbers Art Higbee and Jim Erickson made the first free ascent of the regular northwest face route, eliminating all the aid moves, almost. It was Erickson's 10th try to free climb the route. Roped together, belaying every pitch, using pitons, nuts, and bolts for protection, the duo required 34 hours of extreme climbing to reach a point only 100 feet short of the summit. There, to their chagrin, they had to resort to aid to surmount the final obstacle. The glitch rendered the deed a magnificent failure in Higbee's and Erickson's eyes. But subsequent climbers, impressed by the achievement, have granted them the first free ascent. Higbee and Erickson rated the climb solid 512, close to the highest level of technical difficulty accomplished at the time anywhere in the world. The single passage on which they had to resort to aid would also prove to be the dramatic crux of Alex's 2008 climb. By 2008, no one had ever attempted to free solo a grade 6 climb, let alone succeeded on one. That September, my elbow seemed healed, and I was in top shape from all that cruising around in the High Sierra. Dwelling on Half Dome for months had put me in a mental state where I felt I had to do it. Maybe I just spent so much time thinking about it that now I had to clear it from my mind. I'd climbed the route 5 or 6 times with different partners, but I'd freed all the moves, roped up and clipping in pro in case I fell only twice. Most recently 2 days before my solo attempt, when I'd gone up there with Brad Barledge. There are 3 completely blank sections on the route that Robbins' team solved by going on aid as they drilled bolt ladders through the impasses. Almost everybody. It's a bad habit I have while reading. I don't know if anyone else does this, but just inserting words that you feel like belong somewhere, Like it just seemed to flow better to me with almost everyone, so I just say that. I just need to read it as it is. Almost everybody climbs the bolt ladders today. They're secure and relatively easy for aid, but free variations have been worked out that bypass those blank sections. That's why it's possible to climb the whole route free, as Higbee and Erickson almost did, though they were roped up and using pro. After Brad and I climbed the route on September 4th, I spent the whole next day resting, sitting by myself in the van, thinking about the route. I was still somewhat conflicted about going up there alone. Do I really want to do this? I've already made plans with different friends to climb a few days later in the valley, so I felt some pressure to get my soloing done before any of them showed up. Ultimately, I decided to go back up to the base of Half Dome the next day. I told myself that I could just hike back down if I wasn't psyched. I've done that a few times, or even started a route and then backed off. In 2006, on Royal Arches Terrace, a long climb in the valley, but technically a pretty easy one, I climbed a pitch and a half up the friction slab at the start of the route, then realized I just wasn't into it. I downclimbed, hiked back to the road, and hitchhiked out of Yosemite. I was done for the season. This time, though, I knew that once I got up the base of Half Dome, there was no way I was going to bail. I didn't want to make a big fuss about my project, so I told only 2 people about it, Brad and Chris Widener. Brad said, "What the fuck?" But then, "Okay, be safe. Text me when you're done." He was being a bro. It sounds kind of more like he was being a dad. Anybody else? "Okay, be safe. Text me when you're done. Make good choices." Chris tried to talk me out of it. "Dude, that's crazy," he said. "You should rehearse the hell out of it on a top rope before you try to solo it." "Nah," I answered. "I want to keep it sporting." "Are you crazy?" When I look back on those exchanges, it sounds as though I was being flippant or arrogant. That's not what was going on. I just didn't want to make too big a deal about the attempt, especially in case I backed off low on the route. It's bad form to brag about a climb before you do it, and I didn't want my good buddies to get too alarmed. Then I might start worrying about them, worrying about me. I guess I was just trying to reassure them. "Hey guys, I think I can handle this. I'll be safe." There was something else going on as well. Despite my emphasis on methodical preparation, I'd begun to think that maybe I'd rehearsed the moves on Moonlight Buttress so thoroughly that I actually took some of the challenge out of the climb. Half Dome was so much bigger than Moonlight that it would take forever to get all the moves dialed. I decided to head up the wall with a little less preparation. That's what I meant by keeping it sporting. Interesting. So this is, again, a glimpse into the mind of Alex Honnold that I don't relate to, but I think is extremely captivating about the way he thinks about how just rehearsing a climb, just knowing the moves takes some of the difficulty away, which I wouldn't say is incorrect necessarily, but it certainly wouldn't stop me from doing it. Or, I don't know, it's very interesting to learn the way he thinks and the way he critiques himself, even though he's doing something that so many of us can't and won't ever be able to fathom, even on a very minute level. Anyways, as it would turn out, maybe too sporting. In September, it's still pretty hot in the valley. That meant there weren't likely to be many other climbers on the face, which is what I was hoping for. But because the wall faces northwest, in September it stays in shade the whole day, which meant I could climb without getting too sweaty or dehydrated. Sweaty hands make smooth climbing pretty dicey, no matter how much you chalk up, and dehydration not only saps your strength, but also can interfere with your judgment. So on September 6th, I found myself at the base of the route again, with a much lighter load than I'd carried with Brad 2 days before. The approach hike had taken far less time, but the whole way I felt the face looming over me. I tried not to think about it too much. It was a bluebird day, a perfect, clear morning. Resting at the base, I felt completely detached from the rest of the valley, glowing in the morning sun below me. As I had hoped, I had the whole wall entirely to myself. For the next few hours, I would be alone in a unique way, locked in a high-stakes game of solitude. It's not much trouble to climb through a roped party when you're soloing. I'd done it before, and I'd do it again. But encounters on the wall, especially if they express their incredulity that you're climbing without a rope, can make you self-conscious. And that can interfere with the absolute concentration you need to pull off a big free solo. Before such a climb, I have to get really psyched up. And once I'm off the ground, I'm totally fixated. I'm going to do this. It's the most important thing in life right now. That's not the kind of mental state I can share with random strangers. I was wearing only shorts and a long-sleeve t-shirt. I had my Miura rock shoes on my feet and my chalk bag dangling at my back, but no harness, not even a single carabiner. In one pocket, I put a few Cliff Kid Z-bars, my favorite multi-pitch snack, and I filled a collapsible flask with about 1/3 of a liter of water. I put that in my other pocket, though it pulled my shorts down a little. But I knew it would take me a few hours to climb the route, and I didn't want to be parched by the time I reached the hard pitches up high. A pack was out of the question, partly because all the chimneys in the middle of the route, it's almost impossible to chimney wearing a pack, but mainly because the climbing was hard enough that I didn't want any extra weight on my body. Finally, there was nothing else for me to do but quit procrastinating and climb. I started up the first pitch. For years, the great Yosemite pioneers had been heroes of a sort to me, the guys from the golden age of the 1960s. Royal Robbins, Warren Harding, Yvonne Chouinard, I hope I got that one right, Tom Frost, Chuck Pratt, and the like, were almost too remote in history for me to appreciate, even though I'd read stories about their memorable antics. It was the self-described stone masters of the next generation, in the 1970s and 80s, that I most admired. John Long, Jim Bridwell, Billy Westbay, Tobin Sorensen and their buddies, all absolute legends, by the way, as with the previous names as well. But if you don't know these guys right here, you got some research to do. But especially John Bakar and Peter Croft, because of their soloing and free climbing at the highest level. And Lynn Hill, the first person, male or female, to climb the nose route on El Capitan completely free in 1993. A year later, she freed the route in a single day. Those are still two of the greatest feats ever pulled off in the valley. I was also fascinated by John Yabo Yablonsky, to whom so many wild and crazy stories clung, about him falling off a free solo and saving himself by catching a tree branch, about his new descent of North Overhang and his infamous screamers when he fell roped as far as 100 feet, only to be caught by miracle belays. Yabo was evidently a tortured soul, for he committed suicide in the early 1990s. A lot of the Stone Masters, though, were into drugs. Some of them even bragged about doing serious climbs in Yosemite while they were tripping their brains out on LSD. Their style was part of the counterculture movement of the day, but I just couldn't relate to it. I've never done drugs, and though I've tasted alcohol, I've never had a whole drink. I don't even drink coffee. I had a small cup once. It was like drinking battery acid. I had to poop all morning. I once had a sniff of scotch. I thought, I should be cleaning my sink with this stuff. It's not some moral objection. Drugs and booze and caffeine just have no appeal to me. I grew up in Sacramento, California. Both my parents taught English as a second language at a series of institutions in the United States and abroad. It says English as a... Oh, yes, I get it. I was confusing it with ASL, which is American Sign Language. Just ignore me, okay? Eventually, they landed more permanent jobs at American River College in Sacramento. My mom, Deirdre Walunik, taught ESL, Spanish, and French at the college. Today, she constitutes the entire French department for the school. She's a gifted linguist, fluent in 3 foreign languages, French, Spanish, and Italian, and competent in German, Polish, Japanese, and a bit of American Sign Language. My dad, Charles Honnold, got a full-time job teaching ESL at American River College before my mom did. So I grew up in an intellectual academic climate, for whatever good that did me. I don't know if that's bitterness or just his cold humor. You know, sometimes it's hard to delineate, I guess, his emotions just based on his speech, because he is very cold when he talks. And this is just him talking. You know, I mean, it's a written version of it. But anyways. Mom likes to tell people that on the day I was born, August 17th, 1985, I could stand up, holding onto her fingers. Like a lot of her stories about me as a kid, I tend to think that she made that up, or at least stretched the truth pretty far. She told journalists that from the time I was 2 years old, she knew I'd become a climber. She also relates a story about taking me to a climbing gym when I was only 5. According to Mom, she was talking to the supervisor, turned around, and found me 30 feet up in only a minute or two. She says she was scared to death I'd kill myself. Hilarious, because she's probably still scared to death of that. There's a lot of good interviews with Alex Honnold's mother, by the way. I highly recommend listening to all of them. Just her talking about the way she feels about what he's doing and her trust in him as well. My sister, Stasia, was born 2 years before me. From our infancy on, Mom spoke only French to us. Her idea was to make us bilingual. She still speaks only French to us when we visit, but Stasia and I rebelled from the start. We'd answer her in English. Even so, I'll have to give my mom the credit for making me pretty fluent in French. My grasp of the language has come in handy on many trips to France and 3 to North Africa. Mom may be right about me being an uncontrollable, hyper little monster. At age 5 or 6, I broke my arm for the first time. I decided it would be fun to run down the slide at Carl's Jr., my favorite restaurant. I went over the edge. The docs called it a green twig radius fracture, whatever that is. I broke my arm a second time at age 7 or 8. This was a really pitiful accident. In fact, it's hard to describe how I fucked up. There was a big rope that was part of a play structure in our backyard. It was meant to be a rope swing, but I rigged it as a tightrope, then laid down on it as if it were a hammock. Fell off and broke my arm. Nice. It's just one of those things, when you rig yourself a hammock, you got to be ready to break an arm. Dad took me to the local climbing gym when I was 10. It was just a random stab at another kind of recreation, but it took from the first day. For years thereafter, he would drive me to the gym and spend the whole afternoon belaying me. He wasn't interested in climbing himself. Later, he even drove me to other gyms around California where I'd enter competitions. He was a man of very few words. We'd drive for hours with almost no conversation. He wasn't comfortable expressing his emotions, but belaying me tirelessly and driving me all over the state was his way of showing love, his own way of showing love. From childhood on, there was an elephant in the room. It was that my parents weren't happily married. They didn't fight openly. It was more just a kind of chilly silence that filled the house. For Stasia's and my sake, they waited till after I graduated from high school to get a divorce. But we knew they were going to split up because we occasionally read Mom's emails. The real bummer for them was that they were so much happier after they got divorced and they stayed friends. I'm sure a shrink would have a field day with the fact that, to this day, I have a hard time remembering the details of my childhood. In 2011, when Alex Lothar interviewed me for a profile for Alpinist, he started quizzing me about the early years. I told him that my memories were fuzzy and unreliable. Ask Ben about this stuff, I said. Ben Smalley and I had been friends since first grade. I do like this section about his parents. I relate to it in maybe a subtle way. My parents' divorce was also, I guess you could describe it as sort of a chilly silence. Also knowing it was going to happen before it happened, something that occurred to me in my teenage years, just kind of realizing what was happening around me, and that two people that I always thought would be together forever just weren't anymore. They weren't going to be anymore. It can have lasting effects. I'll just say that about it. But there was no fighting. You just learn, I guess, at some point that it's possible for people to stop loving each other. It sounds like Alex learned that too throughout his childhood. Lothar did just as Alex suggested, contacting Smalley, who by 2011 had become an Air Force lieutenant. Smalley's sardonic portrait of Alex as a kid and teenager rounds out the picture of the dorky misfit Alex genuinely considered himself, even after he started to attract the notice of the climbing world. According to Smalley, as told to Lothar, Alex wore sweatpants to school every day. There was a gray pair and a blue pair. He wore t-shirts that were 2 sizes too big, and they said things on them like, "I hiked the Grand Canyon," "Visit Yellowstone," or "How to identify deer tracks." He sounds like a winner. He was very good at capture the flag, defensively. He could talk to you about the War of 1812 for an hour. It wasn't so much that he was shy as he just didn't even bother to try. Like, he would speak to you if you spoke to him. He wore hoodies in class, always with the hood up, and he would just sit there. But he always knew the answer if a teacher called on him. He's got sort of a Holden Caulfield thing going on. Maybe in that he's always on the lookout for a phony. I really like this paragraph told by his friend about young Alex Honnold because, and weirdly enough, And while I don't mean to project, a lot of this does remind me of myself growing up. It's just interesting to relate to someone that I previously have not related to, because he does something that I could never comprehend, but learning more about him as a human being, as a person, and not just an athlete. I like it. Now, certain things are very different than how I was as well, but just specifically this section about not being shy, but just not bothering to talk to people. But if you engage, I'm still kind of like that. In fact, I maybe won't engage in conversation or start the conversation. Once you spark it with me, though, I can keep that flame burning for hours. When that passage was read out loud to Alex, he confessed, "Ben's got me down." All the details about his youthful persona, Alex confirmed. The passage stirred up other memories. "I still love sweats," he said. "I never wear jeans." And I had another t-shirt from Banff or Jasper with a picture of a bear on it, but a bear with antlers. It read, "I am not a bear." It was part of some kind of Don't Feed the Bears campaign. About the War of 1812. My dad gave me a book about decisive battles in history. The Monitor and the Merrimac, Hannibal crossing the Alps, that kind of thing. I loved history. It wasn't that I hated school, just that I was an uncool kid. I had a hard time talking to strangers. In Lowther's profile, Smalley went on, his parents were not very happily married. His father would sit on the couch most nights, reading until he fell asleep. I would say Alex got worse in high school, actually. He withdrew further. He hung out with the kids who played Pokemon in the math room at lunch. During sophomore year, Alex got his first girlfriend. Her name was Elizabeth Thomas. She went by E.T. That would give you some idea of the social circle she ran in. I love that. I just don't think Alex thought the typical high school stuff was for him. He considered himself more of a loner. Again, it's just things for me to relate to. We have similar situations, just in this way, in that my parents also divorced when I was in high school. So you're developed enough, to understand what's going on and for it to affect you at a very emotional level. And I also hung out with the kids who played Pokemon at lunch. I still hang out with those kids. Those are my boys, dude. What's up? Says Alex, E.T. was cool. Ben didn't like her. She was half Irish, half Japanese. A nice girl, real smart. We were a couple for maybe 3 years. In high school, Alex consistently scored high marks, finishing with a weighted grade point average of 4.8. That's nutty, by the way. That's straight A's plus honors, basically. Yet he wasn't at all sure he wanted to go to college. At the last minute, he applied only to 2 branches of the University of California, at Davis and Berkeley. Accepted by both, he chose Berkeley. The single year he spent at one of the most elite bastions of higher learning was, as Alex feels now, a waste of time. I had vague plans to major in engineering, he says, but I didn't make any friends at Berkeley. I can't recall a single student or single professor. I should have lived in a dorm instead of the 2-bedroom apartment a friend of our family let me sublet. I spent a year basically in isolation. I did have a job as a security guard for $14 an hour. I'd walk around by myself all night. I had a police radio. Sometimes I'd escort girls back to their dorms. That sounds like the gig for a college student, if I'm being honest with you. The second semester, I'd stopped going to classes. If I just bumped the camera, by the way, that's my bad. I might have. The second semester, I stopped going to classes. I'd buy a loaf of bread and an apple and go out to Indian Rock, a diminutive. Did I just mix up the U and the I? A lot of vowels there. A diminutive crag in the suburban Berkeley Hills, and do laps. I just couldn't hack college. That summer, like most freshmen, he moved back home with his mother. Alex's parents' divorce became final in May of his freshman year. 2 months later, on July 18th, his father was rushing through the Phoenix airport trying to make a tight connection when he dropped dead of a heart attack. Alex got the news when he came home from a long hike. He recalled the event to Alex Lowther. The house was open. All the windows were open and stuff, but everything was dark. Nobody in the house. And I was like, Mom? Mom? And went and found Mom sitting outside in the pool. sitting with her legs in the pool, just sitting there crying. And she was like, "Your dad died." I don't remember what she said, but basically like, "Your dad died." And then she went to bed. I don't remember disbelieving her, but for all I knew, he could still be alive. I never saw a body. There was never a real funeral. This little can of ashes showed up one day, and people said he was dead. I read all the articles about him. For a while, I would see people on the bike path, people who looked like Dad, with a big beard and just all big, and I would be like, "Oh," and then, "Oh, that wasn't him." Ben Smalley told Lowther, I kind of had to yell at him about it. "Why aren't you upset?" I think deep down Alex never did any mourning. "Did you mourn at all?" Lowther asked Alex. "I was too young and angstful," he answered. "I had too much anger." Alex clarifies, "It wasn't that I didn't believe Mom when she told me Dad had died. It's that my family doesn't do funerals. Dad was cremated in Phoenix. There's a memorial service at a Lake Tahoe. I thought, I'll never see him again. But there was no closure." Charles Honnold was 55 when he died. Alex was 19. The event crystallized Alex's decision to drop out of Berkeley. Supported by the interest from his father's life insurance bonds, he borrowed his mother's minivan and set out for various California crags and the life of a dirtbag climber. In 2007, he bought a used Ford Econoline van that he converted into a cozy garret on wheels. 8 years later, after many home improvements, and despite his fame and unexpected wealth, Alex still lives in the van. His default residence is his mother's house in Sacramento, where he spends a few weeks each year. Whether or not he truly mourned his father's death, the loss had a profound impact on Alex's outlook on life. His mother's parents had been devout Catholics, and both Stasia and Alex attended Catholic services when they were young. The effect was to turn Alex into a confirmed atheist. As he sardonically commented in a 2012 YouTube video, "At no point did I ever think there was ever anything going on with church. I always saw it as a bunch of old people eating stale wafers." His father's death brought home the carpe diem injunction to live the only life he has to the fullest. In a 2012 Q&A for National Geographic Adventure, Alex came up with a startling metaphor. He was asked, "If you don't believe in God or an afterlife, doesn't that make this life all the more precious?" Alex responded, "I suppose so, but just because something is precious doesn't mean you have to baby it. Just like suburbanites who have a shiny new SUV that they are afraid to dent. What's the point of having an amazing vehicle if you're afraid to drive it?" This is actually an incredible metaphor. I know that he used the word startling to describe it. I think that we're maybe startled by how stoic he was about it, but I think that's a fantastic metaphor. I really do like just the candid nature of Alex Honnold and the way he just, these things just come out of him. These are just his true feelings. I mean, these are things that he thinks. And he does not filter them. They don't get run through a filter on the way out of his mouth. It just gets expelled from his body, straight from his brain, straight from the brain of Alex Honnold. What's the point of having an amazing vehicle if you're afraid to drive it? I like that a lot, actually. I'm trying to take my vehicle to new and interesting places, and I try my very best not to crash, but at least I take it out. I do think that I'm going to stop here for today. I think this is a good natural starting point as the story takes a turn in a different direction after this point. And again, we're roughly halfway through chapter 2. I do think that some of these chapters are going to be cut into 2 pieces. I know not all of them are long. Some of them are a little bit shorter, but chapter 3 is another long one. Chapter 4 as well. They're all 20 pages or more. So I do want to try and keep these videos relatively short. For those who are going to be listening to these, just to draw the series out a little bit longer and make you wait, just teaching patience. But we will finish chapter 2 next week. I will see you guys next Wednesday. I hope you guys are enjoying this. It was a little bit of a somber chapter. We learned about some of the heartbreak, or his version of heartbreak, I guess, that he went through. And we're slowly piecing together what makes Alex Honnold who he is. So I will see you guys next week, and thank you so much for watching, listening, and hopefully enjoying. Let me know what you think in the comments below if you have any suggestions for the way I'm formatting this. It's pretty loose, it's pretty casual, so if you have any suggestions for me, I'd be happy to hear them, and see you guys later.